Well, good evening. This is Hound Dog Steve coming to you on the 15th of April. This is a Sunday evening, and here are some things that I picked out of the news over the last week. And first, let me apologise for having 2 weeks without posting a video, but I have been so sick. It's been unbelievable. I came down with some kind of stomach flu, and it has just absolutely floored me. I am just regaining some of my energy now. But I do not want to be that sick ever again. I can't believe how exhausted I was. Sleeping 16 hours a day. I get home from work and basically just hardly eat anything, maybe a soup or something, and then fall on the bed and wow. Anyway, hopefully this is building my immune system up, and anyway, we're back on the road again. I'm feeling actually pretty good, feeling pretty lively. And so let's go through some of these news items. The first one, Ryerson planning whiteout. Now, Ryerson is a university in Toronto, and this is a seminar set to eradicate so-called white privilege. Okay, they are also offering a special one-day boot camp for students as young as 11, where they will be coached or indoctrinated on how to dismantle white supremacy, white privilege, and other forms of oppression. And of course, it strikes me that by focusing on white supremacy, the program for youth is at odds with the ultimate goal of Ryerson's equality engineers, namely to build an equitable and inclusive society that is inclusive with everyone except whites. And if you want to know how low this will go, this is a story about Nora Loreto, of the Huffington Post. Sad, senseless remarks. Okay, so recently up in Humboldt, Saskatchewan, there has been a horrible accident with a semi and a bus full of hockey players who, wow, the 16 dead. It's just awful. It's a horror. It's an absolute horror show. A horror show. So this woman, Nora Loreto, of the Huffington Post, said in a tweet, "I'm trying not to get cynical about what is a totally devastating tragedy, but the maleness, the youthfulness, and the whiteness of the victims are, of course, playing a significant role." You just have to shake your head at these people. This is how low they will sink. They will jump on any tragedy. If you are a feminist, do not for 1 second believe that this postmodernist feminism, this cultural Marxism that's taking place, has anything to do with what you believe in. Okay? This is where it's going, folks. If you are white, you are in big trouble. And I don't see how we resolve problems by just reversing the situation. Anyway, good example. Take heed. Take heed. This will give you an idea how quickly things can change on the ground. The time for reconciliation is over. South Africa votes to confiscate white-owned land without compensation. South Africa's parliament has voted in favour of a motion that will begin the process of amending the country's constitution to allow for the confiscation of white-owned land without compensation. The motion was brought by Julius Malema, leader of the radical Marxist opposition party, the Economic Freedom Fighters, and passed overwhelmingly by 241 votes to 83 against. And the most terrifying thing about this is Mr. Malema has been leading calls for land confiscation, forcing the ANC to follow suit out of fear of losing the support of poorer black voters. In 2016, he told supporters he was not calling for the slaughter of white people, at least for now. Civil rights groups have accused the EFF and the ANC of inciting an ongoing spate of attacks on white farmers characterized by extreme brutality, rape and torture. Last year, more than 70 people were killed in more than 340 such attacks. Okay, now I was in South Africa when Nelson Mandela was on Robben Island, and I saw apartheid firsthand, what it looked like, and it is not pretty. But this is not what Nelson Mandela foresaw. He wanted to see white and black get along together, and now we are going to see a white genocide in South Africa. A country that is already struggling environmentally with water resources, but this is going to be Zimbabwe. Go look at what happened to Rhodesia as soon as Mugabe took over and they got rid of the white farmers. All of a sudden they couldn't feed themselves. Crescent International, Erdogan becomes Sultan, but just by a hair. Okay, here, without waiting for all the votes to be counted in a April 16th referendum. So they had a referendum to never have referendums again. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan declared victory. My nation stood upright and undivided, he said. The referendum was held to allow for a new constitution that would give the president sweeping new powers. April 16th was a victory for all of Turkey, he declared triumphantly. And of course, here again is China's parliament votes to abolish presidential term limits. Lawmakers overwhelmingly endorse a controversial constitutional amendment that would allow President Xi Jinping to stay in office indefinitely. This, folks, is what happens when you lose control of your parliamentary process. So stay alert, stay on the ball, stay involved, participate. We have a good system here that has some awful flaws. We don't need to throw out the whole system. We need to fix the flaws. But this just shows you how quickly things can change on the ground if you're not paying attention. The barbarians are at the gate. And of course, this feeds into the next story. A great little joke here. Of course, that is Doug Ford in the picture, and Kathleen Wynne is holding the newspaper. April is the cruelest month, and of course now we have the witch hunt. Ontario Liberals dire predictions about Doug Ford and his leadership. They are basically painting him as a Donald Trump, and that he is going to dismantle every good little thing that the Liberals did. And yet, Doug Ford, one of the things Doug Ford has said, he's going to kick out the head of Hydra. The CEO, Mayo Schmidt, has just received something like a $1.6 million increase to his pay package, which puts him now about $6 million a year in pay. And if Doug Ford does happen to fire him and the board, it is going to cost somewhere around $10 million to get rid of this guy. And but after all is said and done, 2 years, you paid the guy $12 million to do what? So the Liberals are fear-mongering, scandal-mongering, and of course, here we are. Ontario's electricity costs a result of poor government policies, report finds. A province's residential power bill spiked 71% between 2008 and 2016, grossly outpacing the 34% national average. So something is clearly wrong with Hydro One, and I think a lot of it has got to do with this global payment, which is a payment for a green exercise, a greening of Ontario, but we are buying and paying for power plants that are not needed. And that money that's being spent, and of course because it's a government job, it costs you 10 times more than it would if it was a private contracted job, is coming out of the global payment situation, out of the global payment on your hydro bill. Okay, that global payment, it sounds like you're investing in some kind of global green carbon emitting, some kind of investment thing, but really it is just global because it covers the entirety of Hydro One expenses, OPG expenses. Okay, and they are to pick up, it's a sort of a catch-all for any overspending or misspending that takes place within the hydro system. And many of these new facilities that are coming online are not needed. They're not needed. So anyway, it's going to be an interesting election because, you know, I see very much we're being placed with the same kind of question that was south of the border. Do you want to vote for Hillary Clinton, which is more of the same, and we all know what the Obama years delivered, and what Hillary Clinton was going to deliver, that she was going to completely ignore the plight of the middle class and focus only on the upper echelon of the society. And of course the other card was Donald Trump, a wild card. So who are you going to vote for? You're going to vote for Win? 15 years, we know what we're getting with a Liberal government. Or do you vote for a bit of a wild card with Doug Ford and take a chance? Well, I'll tell you one thing, if I was south of the border and I was offered that choice, I would have voted for Trump. I can see where the democratic policies are leading us, and it is not down a good road. Okay, we are so far in debt. The Democrats, the Liberals have doubled our debt in Ontario. We've gone from 150 billion to 325 billion dollars in debt that we owe. This will never be paid off. It'll be our great grandchildren. Maybe, but I don't think so, because we now have to borrow money to make the interest payments. What could go wrong? Okay, next story. Here we are. Zuckerberg. Look at that. Apparently they had to get him a pillow to throw on his seat because he's actually quite short. So he's been boosted up about 4 inches. And of course the US Senate grills Zuckerberg over data misuse, and I listened to some of his answers. The responses were pretty much boilerplate kind of stuff. He really avoided the hard stuff and just kept sort of saying that he really just wanted to connect people across the world and make it all kind of like a happy little family situation. Now, of course, the Senate, most of them are geriatric, and so most of them really didn't even understand the concept of Facebook or what it meant in the broader picture. But there were several very pertinent questions, and I think these are the important questions, and that is Facebook a level playing field when it comes to your particular ideology? Because it is well known now that Facebook has been basically downplaying conservative sites and religious sites, this kind of stuff, anti-abortion sites, and promoting liberal sites. And he tried to say in his testimony that, well, you know, the Silicon Valley is extremely left-leaning, but that's not the point. That's not the point. You know, if you are censoring certain websites because of their belief or their ideology and promoting other sites, you need to be upfront and telling people that that is what you are deliberately doing. And they brought up an example of Diamond and Silk, you know, who are Trump supporters and actually very funny. You might want to go check them out. And here they are being censored by Facebook their Facebook shares are not getting around, people are not having access to their Facebook page, that kind of stuff. So, you know, this is where Facebook is becoming very dangerous, because it can, you know, it's not that it sold the data to Cambridge Analytica, it's that it is Cambridge Analytica. Okay, it is weaponizing information by omission. And the other thing, of course, we need to be aware of is that these hearings, the net result, what is the net result? Well, here we go. Let's regulate it. It's uncontrolled. It's the wildebeest running wild on the plains of Africa. And we need to regulate it. And governments have always wanted to regulate the internet and to decide what you are going to say and what you're not going to say. And of course we have these definitions that Mark Zuckerberg continually referred to. Well, we don't want hate speech and terrorism. Well, define hate speech. Define terrorism. How do you explain, say for example, the Syrian people who are revolting against Bashar al-Assad? To Bashar al-Assad, those people are terrorists. And the people that you see from Syria who are opposed to Assad on Facebook and YouTube and this kind of stuff are propagating dissidency and pushback against the leader of a country. Now, we would say that was good because we don't like Bashar al-Assad. But if it were against Emmanuel Macron of France, we'd say that was bad because we like Emmanuel Macron as a leader. Okay, so how do you define that? Who's going to be the one who defines who's a terrorist and what is hate speech and who is the person who is being vilified? You know, Facebook recently turned down a Catholic Association's post because it was violent and bloody. What was the post? You guessed it. It was the crucifix with Jesus on it. And this is the problem with the algorithms. The algorithms can't define this kind of stuff. It doesn't have a cultural awareness. It can't tell between a crucifixion of Jesus Christ and somebody getting their head cut off by an ISIS warrior. And okay, here we are, last vote. This is an editorial from the Globe and Mail. A clean vote, but for what? And this is the only reference so far that I've seen to the Hungarian election. The right-leading Mr. Orban won with a absolutely crushing 2/3 win over the socialist parties. And of course, it's kind of interesting because it says here, democracy is about more than elections. It requires checks on the governing party between elections in the form of legal protest, a robust press and strong judicial oversight. It needs civil society groups that exist beyond the control of the state. This is worth remembering as Viktor Orban returns to power in Hungary for a third consecutive term as Prime Minister. Okay, so it's interesting that they would bring this up because if you remember the G7 and the G20 protests that were basically stomped on by the police, people were kettled, people were arrested for peaceful protests. There was police provocateurs in Montebello in Quebec actually provoking violence in the crowd and provoking police action against what was essentially a peaceful crowd. And we have now Bill C-16, which is compelled speech, which forces you to use a particular set of pronouns when it comes to the LGBTQ community. This has never happened before in the history of the Canadian legal system, and it's absolutely outrageous. That means if you have compelled speech, you do not have freedom of speech. We are being denied access to proportional representation, where the Liberal government said that it wouldn't have a referendum on that unless it could have the option for the status quo. So we can see what the Liberal government, and this is amazing because it's a Liberal government, thinks about freedom of speech and freedom of representation and the will of the public to be enacted by the government. And here we are, criticising Hungary because they have shunned the idea of immigration into their country because they feel that it is a destabilising force. But this right now is Brussels' worst nightmare, because you now have Hungary, Austria, the Netherlands, recently Italy, Denmark, all Brexit, all going against the European Union. The anti-globalist movement and the neo-populist movement is gaining ground. And what we have to remember, you see, as much as you want to complain and criticise about Viktor Orban, okay, or any of these populist governments, is like Newton and his equal and opposite laws. Everything has an equal and opposite reaction. The swing to the right is a reflection of how far to the left we have gone. And when you go too far to the left, there is an equal and opposite reaction, and we are seeing a post-globalist world and a new populist kind of government coming into being. And I think that, it's well underway. I think people now in Europe are realising that the level of immigration that has been enforced upon them by commissions and committees of unelected people are pushing their economies to the brink of disaster. And they want redress. They want to be able to have the power to say, no, we cannot sink our ship. We cannot sink our economic ship by taking on too much water. Anyway, these are all incredibly interesting questions. I believe they're going to come to a head this year, because just everywhere you look, there is a state of crisis and discontent from the public. Anyway, please join me with this conversation. If you have enjoyed this video and the information, please like and subscribe below. Please click that big red button. It really helps when you do. And you take care, you have yourself a great week, and we will talk very, very soon. See you now. Bye.